Hey, welcome to the Gold Factor podcast. I'm your host, Bernadette Gold. In today's episode, Finding and Living Your Purpose with special guest author Tessonja Odette. We're going to talk all about finding your purpose, living your purpose, and living a life of your dreams. So, welcome, Tessie. Is it okay to call you Tessie, even though formally you're Tessonja?
Yes, that is still my nickname sometimes. So
So, all transparency, Tessie's my niece. Amazing the things that this girl has done. So, I wanted to bring her on. She's also a graduate of Charm Life Mastery. And her story, I've watched her quietly in the background for years. And the last few years, I am amazed at what you've accomplished. What do you write? Why do you write? How did it come about? I have so many questions. So many questions. So tell us about what you write, first of all.
So I write mostly fantasy romance, fairy tale retellings, and epic fantasy. I always have some kind of romance woven in because I just am obsessed with the romance genre. I love tropey fantasy, so this is definitely the enemies to lovers, the fake dating, all those kinds of tropes that I love that I used to say, oh, that's a cliche. And that in leaning into my joy, I'm like, you know what? It doesn't matter if it's a cliche. That's what I love to read and what I love to write. So those are the kind of books I write.
Awesome. And they are amazing. I mean, you have how many books now out?
Oh man, I'd have to count. I do have 3 series. One of them is a series of standalones. There's 5 now, and then I'm going to be releasing a new series next year. So, and I have a couple other standalones thrown in there. So there's more than 9.
In the young adult fantasy, you're getting some traction and you're getting noticed, right?
Yeah, it's really fun to see my books like on places like TikTok and Bookstagram. There's a lot of familiar faces. I'm like, oh, I know this person. That person's been my reader for so long. But then I'll see someone recommending my book who I haven't had this long time relationship with, and they'll be like, oh, I just discovered her books. Or I'll see like a big influencer will show my books, and it's just like amazing to see that because there's sales on one side. I'm like, oh, my books are doing well or whatever. But there's just something that's so like real and amazing about seeing someone actually talk with enthusiasm about my books who's a stranger. And it's just like, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is real. Like people are really reading my books.
And I'm sure it's not that glamorous while you're writing.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Okay, so let's go back. Let's go back to before you found your purpose, before you became a published author, when you were still seeking. Tell us about that. Like, where were you? What were you going through? Where were you working? What were you doing?
The very first time that I felt the spark to become an author, like a real big spark that was like, this is going to be what I want to do, was when I was 18. I wrote a book. I wrote a full novel and I wrote it really fast. I was like, this is great. This is the best novel ever. And then, I tried to go down the traditional publishing route, and very quickly I realized that it wasn't that good. I got my very first rejection letter. I realized that I wanted to rewrite it. And back then, of course, it wasn't as easy to reach out to other authors and to see what other people's journeys were like, because just social media wasn't a thing yet. Because this was when I was 18. I'm almost 40. So this was over 20 years ago. I felt like I was like alone in having written a not perfect first book. Nowadays, I'm like, when I talk to new writers, I'm like, that's normal. Let's move on. You're not alone. We all write an imperfect first book. Instead of understanding that and moving forward, I just got really, really trapped in self-doubt, and I would give up. So I would take breaks from this book because I was going to rewrite it, and I would chase shiny objects. And a lot of those shiny objects were still things that were very joyful to me, but they fully pulled me away from writing. Things like I was in a band for many years, super fun. I really loved it, but I knew I didn't want to do that as my passion. Yet
I
I
forgot
was,
about that. The
yeah, like
snot rockets.
the Snot Rockettes. There's ETTES at
Sorry,
the end.
not rockets.
Yes,
Yes.
it was so fun. I can't say that I regret it, but it definitely shifted me away from what I knew I wanted to do as my purpose and my joy. And I did a lot of things like that. Like I would focus my time on the things that were easier for me to attain. Because writing was harder. Writing, getting that like validation from writing was a lot harder than going and playing a show with my friends and having people clap. So it took me a while to realize, like, okay, so I'm saying I want to be a famous author, but I'm giving all of my time and attention to everything that's taking me away from it. And that took so long for me to figure out. I felt really spread thin. And every time I tried to go back to that book, I would get in that cycle of self-doubt again. And I'd be like, well, maybe this isn't what I'm supposed to do because I'm obviously not good at it. I don't know, like a basic question, which like, how does archery work? Back then I was like, I don't know how archery works. I can't write a character that does archery. Where now I'm like, well, let's look it up or let's go take an archery lesson. So yeah, a lot of things that like just it was so easy to get bogged down in self-doubt back then. It wasn't until about math, I have to do math 5 years ago, maybe at this point, that I really got serious and had looked and said, hey, you are spending all your time doing these things that are not writing, but you still want to be a writer and this dream hasn't gone away. And so then I started focusing my time. So that's kind of about the what I was doing, what I shouldn't have been. Well, okay, I can't say I shouldn't have been doing it, but
Right.
that's where my mind was and what my actions were doing and why my actions weren't producing the results that I wanted. Who, go figure. I wasn't writing so I wasn't becoming a famous author.
Years ago, and I want to say it was probably it was pre-COVID. So maybe 2017. Is that when you came into Charm
Yeah.
Life?
Yeah, I think so.
It was 2017. And on one of our coaching sessions, you guys were all asking me, Bernadette, how do I find my purpose? What happened for you during that coaching session?
That is one of my favorite memories because it was such a huge turning point. You asked us a question like, well, tell me, what do you think your purpose is? And all of us in the class were like, okay, you could tell. I knew that we were all thinking the same thing. How can we come up with something that sounds impressive, that we're helping other people? How can we make what we want to do sound like this really great and noble thing that's going to help the world? And so all of our answers that we put in, I think we were like typing into the chat or we were speaking up. It was all very similar. And, I remember like, oh yes, I think I came up with one that sounds very noble indeed. And then after that, you were like, no, your purpose is to follow your joy. It was just one of those jaw hits the floor moments. Wait, that's all? Following my joy, that's what it comes down. I don't have to add these layers and layers of I need to do this so that this and this and this. It really can be that simple. It was just that shiver moment where you just like, oh my gosh, why isn't that obvious? Around that time, I kept thinking, well, I want to be an author, but I'm also this spiritual person. Shouldn't I be writing books about spirituality, or shouldn't I be writing? And there is a lot of that, especially when we get into spirituality, there's a lot of, well, you're doing this for your spiritual coaching business. There's so much of that. And that's what I really loved about Charmed Life, is that we were all coming from different walks of life. We weren't all spiritual coaches. We weren't all trying to learn how to do the same thing together. We were learning how to find our joy in just the lives that we had and the desires we had. And so that was amazing to me. I don't have to save the world. I can just follow my joy, and that brings about the same kind of energy in the world as being something like a spiritual life coach would. So yeah, that was amazing to me, and it totally changed how I approached my goals and my visions and how I made decisions for myself going forward. Not that I didn't stumble after
What do you
that.
mean by that? How did you stumble? Do
So
share.
yeah, so even though I was like, okay, well, what brings me joy is writing. I want to write, and I want a lot of people to read my books, and I love writing fiction. I love writing fantasy books. But I still kept getting distracted by those shiny objects. I was like, well, if I want to be an author, I need to, make a living doing something that will give me more time to write. And so I was like, well, why don't I be a writing coach? And why don't I start this business or that business? It was just more things that kept taking me away from just writing my books, because I was like, well, to get there, I must do this, this, and this, instead of actually tapping into my intuition, which is something that you taught me to do. And there were a lot of times that I just had to go through that lesson of, I don't know what my intuition's saying, so I'm going to go do this. Through making those mistakes, or things that I don't even saying the word mistake, just making those decisions And seeing how they panned out versus what my intuition was telling me helped me get better at listening to that. I don't get distracted by as many shiny objects as much anymore. And I still went through a lot of having to try and seeing what my results were. For example, the very first trilogy that I published, it didn't do well. I learned so much from that, though. I learned to compare that series with the next release that I released that actually really took off, and see what choices did I make that were different, and it helped me improve as a writer as well. The funny thing is that I unpublished that first trilogy and I'm rewriting it fully and republishing it now. So another thing that I learned is that just because the first thing that you try in going for your dreams or your goals, even if it doesn't work out, it doesn't mean that's the end, and it doesn't mean that you failed. I probably learned more from that failure, so-called failure, than I did if I would have written a perfect first book, because I had things to compare it to. Oh, that's why this did better than that. Now I have a second shot at republishing a new version of this book and seeing that first book is the first book that I wrote when I was 18. So it does hold a special place in my heart. I've rewritten it so many times now. But yeah, that just because that very first iteration didn't work out doesn't mean it never will, or that you won't get a chance to do it better next time.
Absolutely. When you were going through your questioning phase, how long did that last for you? Like having the little detours before you actually decided that's it, I'm going to publish.
I would say from when I got really serious of saying I'm going to be an author to when I hit publish, it was probably less than a year, because it was right around when I was in Charmed Life. And that is when I got serious and I could really see the steps ahead. And I was like, no, I'm going to focus all my time, or, not all my time, but I'm going to focus my creative energy on getting this book ready to be published. So it was really funny because at that point, it was about 15 years of me playing with that first book, rewriting it, getting stuck in self-doubt. And then once I went through Charmed Life, it was less than a year that I finished that book, and because I was like, this is going to happen, and published it and made decisions. So it was all that time that I could have just been taking action and moving past self-doubt. It took less than a year to get to that point. And not that it took a couple more years after that for me to become a full-time author, but still, that was the step that mattered, was getting past that self-doubt and just taking the action.
Those couple of years, let's talk about those, because that can be a make it or break it time.
Yeah.
For a lot of authors. For anyone that has a dream, you finally do it, and it's not like you have overnight success and you can sit back and the checks just keep coming. That's not realistic, is it?
No. And yeah, I really wanted to make that first trilogy work, and I kept doing the manifestation work to make it. I learned that sometimes the answer is no, not this one. Sometimes the answer is no, not yet. And that was hard because I'm like, okay, so how can I manifest this trilogy to be the best-selling trilogy? And sometimes it's just not, the answer isn't that one. And so it really helped for me to move on, and it really helped for me to find a group of other authors. And so not being alone is important too. Is trying to find other people working through similar goals is really amazing, because that's where you can see that you aren't the only one who maybe didn't write the perfect first book, or who maybe took a detour. Having that support and that encouragement. And so that really helped me as well. And just focusing on blending my creativity, my joy, and my intuition, and smart business decisions. So really, finally, when I blended all that together is when I wrote a book that, as soon as I thought of the idea and started plotting it out, I knew that huge intuitive knowing, this is going to be big. This is going to be the book. And it gave me chills. It's one of those ones. Did it become big because I manifested it become big, or did I know it because I was listening to my intuition and I followed it? I don't know. I don't know which one of those it was, but yeah.
I always say both. People ask me, well, did it become this thing because I manifested it or because I had the intuition? It's both. The infinity symbol, there's no beginning, no end. It's all connected. Yeah. But you listened.
Yep.
You listened. And now you are a full-time, very successful author. And when I say very successful, I mean she's making 6 figures a year as a indie published author. So you
Yep.
didn't go traditional either. You took all the risk yourself.
I did, yeah. A lot of those decisions fall on your shoulders. And so there's still, again, I had to make a lot of business decisions, balancing those business decisions of what everyone says is smart and right and good to do with what is my intuition telling me, like which of these decisions is that telling me to do. And I experienced that with everything from choosing a cover, choosing the right cover for a book. And some things have just been like these really happy accidents as well. And I guess when you're following your joy, and I guess I'll explain that. One of the coolest things that happened is that I designed my one of my book covers. I illustrated it myself, and I'm not a professional illustrator. I wasn't at the time, but I really wanted to do it for fun. I wanted to try out a certain cover style that wasn't super popular yet. It wasn't super popular, but I was like, I can do that. I'm not a super hyper realistic illustrator or artist, but I'm like, I can do that. And art's one of those shiny objects that I had to set aside so I could focus on writing. But now that I had felt way more secure in my commitment to writing, I could start to bring back some of those fun things, and they were no longer distractions. And one of the things I'm going to do a book cover and some character art for fun. It's going to be just for fun. Maybe I'll make a special edition for my readers if they like it. But what most of all, it's just going to be me blending my joys and just having a good time. So I revealed this cover. I already had a different cover for this book. I picked the cover that was the smart business choice. It was the style that everybody else was using in the genre at the time. So this new one went against that, but my readers flipped out. They loved it.
Ooh.
And I was encouraged by some other people in the writing author sphere to use that cover. And I actually had this huge, like, terrifying moment. This was a big up level moment for me because I was like, I can't do that. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I can't replace a professional designer's book cover with one I made myself. And so I had to really get over a lot of fears of being seen and stepping into my own worth and things like that. That was huge. I was having a panic attack after I heard that because so many of those doubts kept coming up. But yeah, so I changed the cover, and it was before I'd published, so it was really easy to change that cover, and that book took off even more than the series before that. That book is Curse of the Wolf King. The funny thing about that is, so I do all the covers for that now because my readers fell in love with that cover style, and I have since illustrated the covers for the previous book. And the funny thing is that when I was writing that previous series that has the covers that I originally tried to get for Curse of the Wolf King, which was, the covers that was the industry standard for the genre, I kept having this nudge that I wanted a cover like the one I later did, but it wasn't popular yet. And then looking back, I'm like, that nudge could have been the one I dismissed because, I chose not to listen to it because everyone was saying, no, this is the cover we use. And so it was really fun to see, I could have taken that as like, oh, I made such a bad choice then, but it was really fun to see where my intuition was speaking to me in the past, and I ignored it. And then later I corrected course. This cover style, and I'm not gonna say I definitely wasn't like the pioneer, but it just wasn't as popular as it is now. So like, I feel like when I made that cover, it was right at the right time when that cover was becoming popular. And now it's a style that you're gonna see on a lot of fantasy romance covers. So
Interesting. So yeah, taking a chance there too. Taking a chance and risk. And sometimes our intuition, I know for me, it has led me places it's like, wow, this is just not sounding rational.
Yeah.
But then you follow through and the breakthroughs just start flowing.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. All right. Well, I mean, good for you and good on you. How many years now have you been a published author successfully?
The end of 2020 is when I went full time, which was crazy because that was in the middle of the pandemic when everyone said everything's going to go bad. And I was like, no, I don't know why, but I just know this is going to go really well for me.
Okay. And then you bought your dream home.
I did. Yes. I bought that at the beginning of this year. Remember in 2020, the beginning of 2020, I made a 5-year plan of all the goals that I wanted to accomplish. Buying a house wasn't on there yet, but by 2021, I'd accomplished all those goals of my 5-year plan. And so buying the house was next. And so, yes, the beginning of this year, I bought my first house only on my author earnings because my husband, like, he pretty much just works for me now. He helps with packaging up books and doing special editions of my books with me. So that was all my author income, which is something that took me a really long time to think was possible, that I could make enough as a as an indie author, enough to where I didn't need to rely on someone. Because for a long time, my dream was to like, oh, it would be so nice if maybe my husband made all the money and then I could just not work and just write books. But like, no, I've like writing books is actually my job now. It took a long time for me to release some of those limiting beliefs around that and just believing that it was possible.
Yeah. You have all the tools to do that though, right?
Yeah.
And you get to stay home and be there for your daughter whenever,
Yep.
however. Any regrets about jumping in and following your purpose, your passion, your joy?
No, no, I really can't. I see even the stumbles and the roadblocks as positive. Like I see them as things that taught me how to do things better the next time and have made me what I am and where I am. So yeah, I can't even think of any regrets. I will say one of the things that I feel like helped me the most, and everyone's gonna have their thing that they're like, this is what really helps me manifest. But you taught us scripting and writing from your future self. That has been my number one favorite thing. I still do that. And I wrote about being in this house. I wrote about what it felt like to see my books on my shelf, and I imagined them in my office on a white bookshelf. And like, I have so many pages in my journal of scripting that future from my future self. That's the thing. Everyone, I feel like everyone has their thing like, oh, this is what I do that makes me really manifest. But yeah, that's mine. That's what I love.
Well, and for those who are listening to just the audio, she literally is sitting in her new office with her white bookshelves and all of her book series behind her. And they're beautiful. I mean, they're beautiful. So, congratulations, first of all, on your success. And I want to commend you for having the bravery to overcome your ego voice that's like, don't do it.
Yeah.
And really pursue what's important to you. Share for a moment, because I think a lot of people have that same thought. Oh, I have to do something that changes the world like Martin Luther King did. No, that's not necessarily your purpose. To bring joy to people through taking them into a fantasy world and expanding their mind, and love stories. Who doesn't like romance, right? Writing stories like that and giving people a break from sometimes very dark realities is a blessing. That is a gift. And for you to be able to craft these amazing characters, weave it together in a story, and you've got some, I mean, with the fantasy side of it, with supernatural gifts and all the things, it just takes them into a new world. Now that you know that is something that is a purpose and a passion that serves value to the world, how do you feel?
It's yeah, I did not it's so I can validate that now because I have gotten emails from people who are like, you've really changed my life. And I'm like, wait, what? I write steamy romance books. But no, they're like, I went through a really hard time, and writing or reading your books and having that escape and like finding these characters that were really relatable and fun, it helped me get through that time. Like, these things are completely unrelated, but they found comfort in my books. And some people have said, I didn't read for a really long time. I really missed reading. And then I read your books and they got me into reading again. And now I get to experience that joy. And even that's important. Just someone finding joy in reading and anything, and me being able to help contribute to that is amazing. It doesn't have to be this huge world altering thing, but people's lives are still being touched in ways that I wouldn't have really expected. So yeah, it's something that I took me a while to realize is actually, it is important, and that is still valid no matter what.
It is important. I mean, as a reader, and I know you read a lot too,
Yeah,
we want to read good stories. And funny, because we learn through story.
we do.
As human beings, that's just how we do it. So for you to also be vulnerable enough to put your great art out there, because sometimes it can feel very personal. And I want to
Yeah.
know about that too before we go. Did it feel like you're like giving your soul to the world?
Not in a bad way, because there are times, one of my limiting beliefs I had to get over was that writers get burnout and writers end up just suffering. Because, you see a lot of these really popular authors who just, they always seem like they're suffering for their art. And I didn't want to do that. And I will say, though, that I do end up putting myself in my characters, but a lot of times it's really therapeutic. I get to express certain parts of myself and my personality, or just maybe even just themes that I've seen and maybe have an experience super close to me, and it can be really therapeutic. So it is really interesting to see. And there's some themes that I see repeated, and I'm like, is it? And people relate to those too. It is really personal, but it's also universal because so many people relate to that and they feel it and they feel seen. And so that's like really amazing.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you for coming on. If there's one piece of advice or a tip for, let's say, a budding author, someone that has a dream that doesn't seem like it's going to change the world, do you have a piece of advice for them?
My number one piece of advice is just to know that you are normal, and that any piece of doubt that you feel is bringing you down, just know that every other author has had the same doubt. And a lot of us who are, maybe far ahead to where you want to be, we're still having those same doubts. They get easier to recognize and to move forward with, without feeling like they're going to crush you. So, don't give up. Don't think that that makes that a doubt or a challenge in the writing or publishing experience makes you a bad writer. It doesn't mean anything about you. This is just a normal experience, and this is just about growth and getting to the next level.
And that's amazing advice, whether you're pursuing golf as a professional or an entrepreneur, or you're packaging food or anything. You have to just keep building your skills and keep trying until you hit that one. It only takes one shining success to get the ball rolling, and then the momentum comes behind
Yep.
it. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Tessie. If you guys want to check out her books, she has amazing young adult fantasy stories, lots of series. You can follow her social media. You can find all of it, though, by going to her website
At TESSONJAODETTE.com. So my first and last name spelled out, and I am at Tessonja at almost every social media handle. I just claim my first name usually.
Go check her books out. Great reads. And thank you for coming on again. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I can't thank you enough times. You are literally just an ordinary human being who followed through on her dreams. And I'm so glad you did and put your gift out to the world. All right, everybody, make sure you give us a like on this episode, share it, and leave us some comments. Let us know if you learned something, if you're inspired. Let us know. We'll see you in the next episode.